Hi everyone, this is Tom, and this week's character is Asmora Nomar for Alexander. She was probably, so far, I think I've said this a lot, but she's probably definitely been the most challenging character to work on yet. Um, Mainly two reasons. One is she has a very well articulated backstory. It's very detailed and long lasting and really grand. Plus, the fact that I didn't know what her class was, I didn't recognize that, and so I was really out of my element. But that's part of the challenge. That's part of the fun. I call this channel R&D Fantasy, which stands for Research and Design. So the research part came in handy, and thankfully Alexander provided me with some reference stuff. But with that in mind, I figure I'd just start off with just going through some of the process stuff, and then we can get into her character more as we go, and some of the details start getting fleshed out. So this is the first time the character has been sort of, that we've been doing is tilted, like facing away primarily. She's sort of looking back over her shoulder. This was good. Alexander included his own notes and a little sketch of kind of what he had in mind as far as pose and stuff goes. And for the most part, I'm fine with that. Like if people have something in particular, that works as long as it works. Normally, my first habit is to just go with the front view, but in this case, I went with it for two reasons. One, the way that he described her costume and her details, it sort of, there was a lot that you didn't have to show up front. Like usually a character looks the best from the front with like all their armor and weapons and everything set up and around. And in the case of this character, it just she could have been, she was pretty consistent all around. It was more of like she had just more of an air of some sort of mood or time period that needed to be captured, and that was handled. You just do that sort of thing with the silhouette, so that was fine. And plus, I'll admit it, I try to avoid drawing the back of characters a lot. I can never keep track of how the shoulder blades and all the muscles on the back work, and I always just gotta always have like reference open for the muscles when I look at the back. But with all my advice of if you have a weak spot, work on it, or if you have a hard time drawing something, go for it. I said to myself that I have to live up to my own advice, so I said, okay, let's do it. So it was actually really fun, and I should do more of it as moving forward. I have actually been doing a lot more studies and things of back muscles and stuff this week ever since doing it, just to I don't know, I just sort of got a taste for it. But this sort of twisted prism, rectangular prism eraser shape around the body is something that is just a nice way that can help break down the figure. It's always nice, and it's always good advice to just work general to specific, big shapes to little shapes, simple forms to tiny details. Always working that way, like in the case of the torso here, it's just you get the twist and the block, and then you just know that like by doing it that way, it kind of helps chip away at everything else. It gives you a framework where now I know kind of if I can find the middle of this back surface, that's where I know that the vertebra or like the backbone is going to be lined up at. I know that the rib cage has to be faced this way. I know that the pelvis can only be so wide. It's so nice to have those constraints. People always seem to have a reluctance to think about their art being constrained or limited or restricted, and I think this probably they mean it in a different way than I do. But in this case, it's such a handy thing. Like if I just know, like in two ways. Like this one is literally like the anatomy is constrained to a limited range. I know that it's in there somewhere, and I don't have like if I can take the whole page and condense it into one tiny little block for where the torso is going to be. It's nice to just be like, okay, I know it's in here somewhere, and just feel it out from there. And then the other restriction is like more subjective, literally. Like, what do I need to draw? What does it need to look like, and all those more particular things that people like to have more freedom on. And I don't blame them. I think that's a natural way to think about art, of like not wanting to be limited or restricted. But to me, I find the exact opposite to be the limiting factor. Like if somebody has unlimited freedom, or if you have unlimited freedom to draw whatever you want, I think it's a lot harder to actually draw anything than it is to come up with something for somebody else. Where that's actually one of the reasons why I'm even doing this in the first place, is because I know I got to draw, I want to draw, but if I was to just leave it up to myself to come up with what I want to draw myself, then I would get bored. I'd give up. Everything would all start looking the same. I would just be drawing what I wanted to draw, and I wouldn't be challenging myself. What was that? I was on sort of a trajectory there. But yeah, it's like if you've ever, I'm probably most of you are artists watching, so you probably know what it's like when you're sitting there and you don't know what to draw, so you look up and you ask your friend, what should I draw? And they say, draw whatever you want. And that's the least satisfying answer you can ever get. Because if you knew what you wanted to draw, you wouldn't be asking them. And I find that being given a sort of a goal or a challenge or some sort of thing that you need to conquer or solve, it turns the drawing process into such a more stimulating exercise, like to be a problem solver. And I think that's where the joy in this sort of stuff comes from, whether it's art in general or concept art in particular. That's my theory. So just having, because even if another thing that I think most artists would relate to is just, it's so much more rewarding to know what you want to draw and be drawing it, or to have something in mind, like a goal or like a challenge to go after, rather than just sitting there and idly just doing freestyle, freeform, random higgledy-piggledy drawings, which can be fun, but it doesn't scratch the itch in the same way. At least not for me. Maybe it's the same for you, but whatever works, just go for it. But yeah, so having I think I've probably said a lot of this in other videos, and I know I've said this next part before, but I think it's true, where it's like people always think of not limitations but requirements, like she has to be this tall, she has to have this color hair, this style of outfit. They would seem that as being restrictive, like they'd feel trapped with those, but I see them not as restrictions but as a foundation, because if you get a description of something, it's so nice to just have that set up as a checklist of, okay, now I got to include this, that, okay, I've got all that, now let's have fun with it and make it come out the way that I want to. So yeah, that's my rant. Yeah, as far as the anatomy goes, mainly the main part that trips me up is drawing a pelvis from the back is a nightmare. And there's this little window right above the scapula, the shoulder blade. You can see I've sort of laid in the larger, more generalized version of the trapezius, that big sort of arrowhead or kite-shaped part up at the top. But then beneath the deltoid, there's that little kind of opening there. And, I've got a better sense of it now after this week of doodling, but there's a whole bunch of different layers of muscle that slides over each other and layers in strange ways, and when you see it as diagrams, it always just makes so much sense, but it's hard to keep that all in mind, and I don't know, I just got to put more time and effort into it. But even the one thing that's really good too is, I think it's probably sort of obvious, but even drawing the figure from the back, from this angle, it helps a lot, even drawing the figure from the front or from the side, because once again you're seeing those shapes all, it's filling out in your mind as a more robust 3D sort of rendering or like structure of the form, and there's a lot that you see on the front of the body from behind, and a lot of the stuff that you see on the back of the body from the front and the side, and to see things in those different angles is extremely important. This is a more concrete example. Like a lot of the time when I draw muscles, I always sort of picture them as being a sort of different scales of sausages, like anything from like a hot dog to a kubasa at the biggest, like for the quadriceps, like the muscles on the top of the thigh. And I have just not directly cylindrical tubes, but I always picture them being more rounded and thick. But if you ever see more detailed diagrams, or even like photos of cadavers, which can actually be really beneficial. Most of the time, though, the photos of the cadavers are like senior citizens, and they've got a different feel to the body as far as like the shapes of the limbs, especially like forearms and hands, and the way that like the body's atrophied over time. It comes with a certain look. But anyway, there's almost a more ribbony, like really laid flat, really well contained kind of muscular system. And by drawing things in different poses from different angles, it's going to give you a way better sense of everything overall. In that way, I mean, you obviously already know that the more you draw of anything, the better you're going to get at it. But that's one particular way that it's going to benefit you. Yeah, she's a very arrogant and tumultuous character, very smug and snide. Actually, I think this was the longest description of a character that I've gotten yet. I'll read it all out to you guys. I've had some positive feedback as far as being able to hear the stories, and I think that's important. It's one thing to see like the process that I go through in most of these, and I am going to be doing tutorial videos. I just got to make sure I can get the format right and everything. Anyway, what was I saying? It's one thing to see the actual technical process, but it's another thing that one thing I want to make sure that I don't forget to do with everybody is to go over more about how the personality or the history or the character itself comes through, and how to sort of think about that. Basically, like, it's been a while since I mentioned it, but concept art is, in a lot of ways, or actually probably primarily, it's sort of like the like in a Sherlock Holmes story when he reads somebody, where he like looks at like the like how their tie is like tucked into their vest, or how they shake his hand, or something super subtle, and he can then tell a lot of details about them. The goal is to try to do that, where you're making clues for Sherlock Holmes to pick up. So, if somebody, if they're left-handed, if you know the character's left-handed, then the way that they carry themselves, even though, the way that they carry themselves, that'd be so subtly different that it's pointless. I don't want anybody to go and like start stereotyping how left-handed people like stand and walk and whatever. It's more like it'd be more like, if somebody's left-handed, what way do they do their hair? Is there any sort of details you can add to that? I don't know. Left-handed, I think, is just too subtle. Either way, I mean, for sure, left-handed, it changes what side somebody wears their sword, depending on what kind of sword. But either way, you'd want it to be the way that a left-handed person would do it, if that makes sense. So concept art is it's visual storytelling. You're trying to make a character as readable and believable as you can by dropping clues, and whether they are accurate or not, people read into how people are dressed all the time, or how they carry themselves, or how they act, or like body language cues and everything, and like your history shows on you, even if you're trying to hide it, in a lot of ways. What sort of clothes you wear, how you wear them, there's a lot that you can pick up on somebody, and even if it you won't be able to like tell them exactly like their life story, or if they're a good person or not, but we all recognize those patterns for the most part in a lot of ways. and you need to be able to translate that onto a character. The tricky part too is in a fictional character is you're kind of doing double duty where you need to make it something that can be recognized by us, but something that would also be recognized by people in that world that you're building on. So like something like spikes on a shoulder pad. If you saw, to us, spikes on the shoulder pad, it's very savage and barbarian and punk rock and aggressive, and it's something that would also likely be aggressive and intimidating and dangerous looking and savage in a fantasy world. That'd be one sort of thing. Clean clothes would be a sign of either wealth, hygiene, fastidiousness, obsession, anything like that. But it would also be the same in both our world and their world. So it's stuff that it would feasibly be would fit in with the world and stuff that fits in with our world at the same time. So it's kind of that's why I always try to emphasize with people that don't use concept art as your reference. Don't get your primary inspiration from video games or movies. Look to history, biology, physics, scientific data in general, but mostly like history and biology and like fashion and human behavior, just like real things, real solid stuff. Having a worldly breadth of or a highly really broad and is a sense of understanding of topics and as deep as you can in some places. We can't know a lot about everything, but just broader interests and going out into the world and experiencing things and noticing patterns and symbols and things that we all share in common as far as like everything basically. So yeah, that's basically what a big part of concept art is. So yeah, of course, using the frame again. I might in the future do one where I don't do the frame, or I don't include it, and then see how that works out. Maybe it'll be a good example of why I use it. Yeah, we'll see. So Asmora's costume, now that we can see it, Alexander kept referencing a character named... what was the name again? Okay, it's written down somewhere else. I've got the write-up all up here. I can't remember the name of the character, but it's Eva Green's character on a show called Penny Dreadful, which I have not seen, but the character is inspired quite heavily in appearance by this character. Actually, one thing I want to mention about the face is I started rendering it out with an occlusion layer, but I found that after working on it for a while, it just looked terrible. So I gave up on it and came back to it later. That's one thing that is terrifying to me, is getting something wrong in front of everybody. But the sooner I realize that I've just gone down a bad path and just start correcting it, the better. It always ends up being better the second time or the third time. And it's better. I get more practice out of it. And it's another important thing is that I want people to see when I mess up, or see when I struggle with something, or try a bunch of iterations trying to get something right. Because no one, it's like I said in the last video, like no one's pooping out perfection. And whenever you see, actually I've known a lot of artists, young artists, that get discouraged by this, about not feeling good enough, and that they're far behind and they'll never catch up to professional artists, and that it's hard to realize that when you see an artist's work online, which is where we see almost all the art of other people, you're seeing the stuff that they're not embarrassed by. You're seeing the stuff that was most successful. You're seeing the stuff that won, basically. their portfolio is written by the winners. And you don't see their sketchbooks, you don't see their process, you don't see them stressing out working at their computer for a lot longer than they should have on something. And you don't see, especially, you don't see the long hours and nights and days drawing and drawing and drawing when all their friends were having fun and they were at home drawing. But yeah, but the main point is that, like, I don't like showing my sketchbooks anymore, just because I don't really sketch that much in them as much as I do now. They're basically just visual note taking, where I'll just do. I mean, they're all such garbage little doodles for me to just remember something later, like a collar shaped this way, or a belt that loops through a hoop this way. You know, just super basic, just really crude stuff. And so there's not much to show, but, or even just like anatomical studies where the faces are just so wonky. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is, for every one drawing that people see that they like of mine, there's probably between 20 and 60 just absolutely garbage drawings. Actually, out of all the work I've ever done compared to all the sketching I've ever done, probably like maybe 2 to 5% of it is stuff that I would ever want anybody to see at most. The rest of it is it's bad, and it's not just me trying to. I'm not even just being humble. It's like, it's actually like bad. Like, I don't even want family members to see it or close friends. Sometimes I can't even trust my friends because I think it's that bad, and that's for real. So I'm totally into letting everybody see all my warts when I'm working on this stuff. And even just the practice of just letting that go. I've seen the benefits of it in my own life as I've been having that in mind, but just letting go of that ego or that diva kind of nature, of just accepting your problems and your mistakes and your challenges, and just letting people see your issues and just letting it all hang out, and just being open and honest about it, and that no one is there's no maestros, there's no more Beethovens. And so yeah, I hope that's encouraging. I want it to be encouraging. Okay, so she's got this dress on. I should go through the character soon, but yeah, she's described as so Penny Dreadful is apparently this strange Victorian sort of show. She's got like the button-down Victorian dress with the black lace and high collar and all this stuff. Just the big shoulder pads, especially, and like sort of the tight-fitting torso and the long dress, all that sort of stuff. So I figured, that would be a good time for me to go through her story. Alexander included a sort of a short Cliff Notes version, and then the long backstory. So I'll go through all of that. So for her dress, something ornate and Victorian with plenty of black lace. Feel free to look up the various dresses Eva Green's character wears on Penny Dreadful as references, or use your own design if you wish. I would prefer it if it had a high lace neck and large shoulders. Other than that, the details are up to me. And I might have gone a little far in a few places for what Alexander had in mind. The actual material and texture and treatment that I went with is still based on his description, but I veered away from just a lot of the costume stuff. But I felt that his description, his intentional mention of the large shoulders, the high neck, and the lace were all perfect, sort of like a perfect capturing of what the Victorian look really needs to be. A few keywords to describe her are elegant and effortless, somewhat creepy, powerful, arrogant, possibly give her an arrogant smirk, as she is very arrogant about her power, and rightfully so. But it did eventually lead to her downfall, spoiler alert. She's an arcane. Okay, this is where I started to get thrown off. She's an arcane caster primarily, which I don't really get. I mean, there's the arcane sort of style of magic, and I guess a caster is somebody who wields it. So that's what she is primarily. But keep her binder class. I have no idea what a binder class is. Keep that in mind when considering her finer details. She is constantly bound to Zeril, which is a vestige from the far realms, which is essentially the Lovecraftian plane in Faerun. If you wish, more info about Zeril can be found here. Ignore the part about signs of the vestige. I replaced them somewhat. Instead of mirror eyes, they are black. But you could combine the two and make them very reflective black, so over time, aspects of her appearance have become somewhat twisted and Lovecraftian. There we go. With ornate fractals and hidden arcane symbols. More details in the reference document. Okay, so basically the only part of that I ever understood really was she's got the Lovecraftian, that the far realms are like the Lovecraftian plane in Faerun. So I was like, okay, I don't want her to look Victorian because, me being selfish and this being D&D, I want everything to look kind of like they're from the same world. I didn't want to have like a steampunk looking character thrown in. I needed her to be fantasy. So when I saw the Lovecraftian plane, I said, okay, let's do that. I wanted that. So it is actually quite similar to the Rayleigh Watley character. He had this leather body armor. And also it is inspired by sort of Wayne Barlow's Inferno. He is, I guess, sort of a concept artist, illustrator. He does a lot of concept art. He's an older guy. Very big inspiration for me. But he's got this book called The Inferno. And it's sort of like a concept artist's trip through hell as like an observer, and it's just all these awesome designs of demons and locations and stuff. And one of the things that I've always liked about it was that he's got this really good kind of like dead elephant leathery skin material. And I always thought that it was such just a cool material, and that's just sort of like where I was inspired from. It's just like wrinkles and just like the flaps and folds, and it's like it's kind of cloth, but it's not, and it's more than cloth, and even that it's like sort of growing into her body. It's a bit, that part where the ends of the sleeves, it's a bit too much like the engineers in Prometheus, or their suit is sort of biomechanical or biosynthetic or whatever sort of word they'd want to use. I don't remember what Giger's term for his alien stuff was like, but it's regretfully similar, but I thought that it would be fitting where I wanted to feel a bit more supernatural than just like a dress, because if it's going to be made of this horrible like deathly just corpse-like material, it'd be nice to have it just not look like something that she just takes on and off like it's a piece of fabric. So there's that. I don't know what a binder class is. I don't know what an arcane caster is. I don't know what Zeril is. I don't know what signs of the vestige are. There's some other stuff in there. He did send me a page, like a sort of a wiki, sort of an official page, and even after reading that, I still didn't get it. I don't really get what a binder is. I think it's like somebody who's sort of like a vassal of some sort of powerful spiritual being, sort of more on the evil side of things. So it was a bit of a mystery. With that in mind, I did read his massive 2.5-3 page backstory, just desperate for extra details and things, but I just found comfort in just going with the description, where I was like, okay, whatever's in this first chunk is primary. These are the things that are most important to Alexander. That plus the sketches that he sent me, and so I figured everything I need is going to be in here, and I of course read what he had wrote and sent me, but I wanted to just sort of satisfy the description. That was my only sort of. I felt lost and adrift, not knowing where I was. But I took all the things that I did recognize, and I just went with what I knew, and that helped. That was really nice. So yeah, she's got black hair, pale skin, green eyes, black scleras. Sclera is the white part on the of the eye. Body type: thin, tall, medium to small breasts, model-esque figure. So you don't really see her breasts. And then the model-esque figure, I just figured long, just sort of a bit longer. Her feet are still quite big, but I always give big feet, but they're not as big as things usually are. A model-esque figure, it's totally fine with. Lots of people have model-esque figures, but I think when drawing something that's a model-esque figure, I think everybody's, for the most part, is actually quite confused about what that is. Everyone thinks that it's thin. It's not thin. It's long. Like the body, like the model-esque figure, is just a long body. It looks thin, but that's just because it's sort of stretched out. I mean, yeah, they are thin as well, but that's one of the things that makes it a difficult body to have. Is that it's literally just the structure of the skeleton that is longer, and like even if you lose a lot of weight with that underlying structure. The scaffolding there, it's not the same look. It's a different thing. It's not thin, but it's long. So I wanted her to be a bit longer, and which was actually kind of good because I have a habit of drawing the legs too long all the time on figures. I always find that like a really good way to just get a good naturalistic body is to put the vertical midpoint right between the crotch and the belly button. And you'll know that, like, that's going to look like really natural. But in this case, her midpoint is more around just the crotch rather than up close towards the belly button. And that just helps give the legs a bit longer thing. And you don't want to get too crazy, but I figured that'd be good enough. Plus she's got that long dress and a thin, sort of like tight-fitting waist, so that kind of helps keep things long. Plus with the high, big shoulder pads and everything. That'll just kind of help stretch things out. Okay, so I figure I'd just go through all the description, and you can it might help everybody get to know her a bit better. So Asmora was born Catherine Ebenhock to the noble family of Ebenhock in Suzale. She always possessed innate magical talent and a keen intellect from an early age. However, due to her abilities and unique physiology, she was chosen by a powerful entity that dwells in the far realm called the Mother of Madness to be her vessel. Therefore, along with her magical talents, all throughout her childhood she manifested several disturbing signs of corruption and possession. She was kept hidden from the public eye and rarely ventured from her family's estate. On her lucid days, she was educated and treated like any other member of the family. Due to her family's wealth and influence, they were able to bring wizards, clerics, and other experts in magical studies to attempt to assess and cure her condition. None were successful. As she grew in both age and power, her abilities became far too dangerous to handle, so she was sent at the age of 8 to an asylum for magical illnesses and arcane study at the suggestion of a cleric that attempted to treat her following an event that ended in the death of her private tutor. This sort of reminds me of Liz Sherman from Hellboy. Not saying he referenced that, but it just sort of reminds me, just like that. A poor, overpowered child who accidentally kills people. Unfortunately, unbeknownst to her family, the cleric that treated her secretly worshipped the Mother of Madness. That's a good sign. His primary job to identify individuals that were chosen as vessels and send them to a central location for study and examination. While at the Institute, Catherine continued her magical studies, and the director of the Institute secretly experimented on her in an attempt to create the perfect vessel so that the Mother of Madness could be reborn into the material plane once again. However, Catherine proved too much for him to handle, and during one failed attempt at experimentation, he accidentally released a fraction of the talent of the latent magical energies within her, which resulted in the destruction of the institution. During the chaos, Catherine escaped into the wilderness. For a few months she wandered, attempting to make her way home, but she didn't know the way. One night, while dying of thirst, she encountered the camp of a powerful binder who took pity upon her and gave her food, water, and shelter for the night. During that night, she once again lost control of herself and manifested her twisted abilities as she was possessed by the entity. The binder was powerful enough to restrain her, and he recognized her ailment as an affliction of the soul. The next day he began teaching Catherine the arts of binding. He recognized that if Catherine bound her soul with other entities willingly, these entities would prevent the Mother of Madness from clawing its way through. After a year of training, Catherine was able to bind vestiges to her soul, and the Mother of Madness was no longer able to influence her. She was then given the name Asmora Nomar and sent on her way. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. A few years passed as she wandered the countryside, too afraid to face her family, searching for ways to increase her magical abilities so that she would no longer be powerless if this entity should ever find its way back inside her. This is when she ran into the other members of the party, and the campaign for her began. Going into the details of the campaign would be far too arduous, as it spans from levels 3 to 27, which is, in my experience, a lot. The basics are that the PCs become involved in a planar rift incident that was plaguing Faerun, as well as a cult of very powerful liches called the Twisted Rune, whose goal was to cast an epic spell that turned every living creature on every plane into undead. That is a big deal. As we leveled, Asmora gained exponentially more powerful and was eventually able to accomplish feats such as felling a dragon in a single blow, as she defended her home Suzail from a horde of dragons that came through a planar rift. She was later reunited with her family. Traversing planes and killing powerful demons such as Balors, entering the Nine Hells and defeating Bel, Lord of the First, which she accomplished by creating the Force Dragon that would later become her butler for a mansion and base of operations for the party, on an island she created off the coast of Waterdeep, and finally destroying the demi-liches that were the leaders of the Twisted Rune as they attempted to complete the epic spell that would change the entire multiverse into an undead hellscape. So try working that into a character design. How do you show that sort of history? Anyway, okay, it's not done. But I hope you can sort of see what I was up against here. During the final fight with the Twisted Rune, she cast 2 epic spells, one to re-ensoul the liches present, and the second to give her essentially infinite stats. By the way, I'm not just making this shit up. It's actually all 3.5 legal tricks you can accomplish if you know what you're doing, which allowed her to transcend reality, turning her into a being of pure cosmic energy, similar to the way the gods look in the Magic the Gathering plane of Theros. This, however, was what the Mother of Madness wanted all along, and in the brief moments following the Twisted Rune's destruction, she was able to use Asmora like a door and claw her way through into the material plane. Asmora would have been destroyed if not for the powerful psychic entity, essentially a Calarak Quarry? Secrets of the Sarlona book, that bound part of itself to her soul, transforming her into a Kalashtar and a psionic being. She lost all magical abilities and gained psychic ones instead, but has since been comatose. For months the party has been without Asmora while she recuperates under the vigilant watch of her Force Dragon companion Jeeves. I've been playing a psychic warrior servant of the entity that saved Asmora in the meantime. The party has been recently invited to the Ebonhawk Mansion for a formal event. It is expected that they will reunite with Asmora once again there. There's some other sort of extra description-y stuff. I may as well. Congrats, you made it this far, or didn't, which is okay, I don't blame you. So here's your chance to surprise me if you wish. You can, as I mentioned, draw Asmora at the peak of her power before she casts the epic spell, as I have described and shown you to the attached reference document, which is what I chose to do. Or you can surprise me and draw her as she would appear now, and I didn't want to take too many liberties with that or ruin anything. I felt if I could just keep it safe, especially with something with so much to it. I felt keeping it safe at this point would be wise. So keep a few things in mind if you choose to do so. Although she's some stuff that would change if she. That's more of just, it's sort of, I should have remembered. It's just descriptions of how she would look nowadays, or after all of this sort of stuff would be destroyed. There's a lot to it. That was that. a lot to work with. It was pretty overwhelming, which made me super glad that he included sort of the summarized sort of version. Also, one thing I wanted to mention too is when I was painting this up, I intentionally just kept the feet simple. They're actually like really crude and kind of clumpy, and I just wanted to do that on purpose. I wanted to just keep it simple and sort of see if I could like spell it out with as few strokes or shapes as possible. And I'm actually kind of really happy I did. Just like scrunched up feet. No one cares about feet. So it was fitting. And yeah, it was fun. And also, it was a nice way to work. With I had just the one general sort of occlusion layer, which is where the photons are bouncing just away from your eye, and that makes things seem darker. But then on top of that, with the sort of a skin color, pinkish tone, almost like colorizing an old photo. And I'm pretty sure it was just a layer of pink set to, I think, hard light, I believe. And I was actually really surprised by the results. I was really happy with it. At my work, I have a new job. I'm an art director now, and one of my concept artists, she has this technique of, it's fairly well used, but where you paint it up, you paint something up as black and white, or just monochromatic, and get all the tones and values right, and then you colorize it and sort of paint up the colors from there. I've never been able to get it working right. It always looks like a colorized photo, which I think always looks really bad. But somehow she's able to do it. And I've sort of been taking a few notes from her as far as like what kind of layer modes she uses. She uses hard light, but very subtly, and that's what I did. And I actually think that this is some of the best skin that I've ever done. I just love how it looks. I really like it. It was just all by luck. I'm not bragging, but I like how it looks quite pale and alive, and it just, I don't know, it works good. There's like cool colors and warm colors, and it works just nice and balanced and everything. And it's just two colors, which is my favorite part. Well, I guess three. There's the base skin color and the occlusion layer, which is just black in this case. I thought I would need to colorize it brown or something for the skin, but I was able to just leave it as just a black layer, and then the pink for the skin. And yeah, I was actually really happy with it. I always make a big stink in these videos about how I don't have like a set sort of approach to how to paint stuff. And it's true, but I want to start doing more experimental stuff as well. So expect in the future I've been experimenting on the side just on my lunch breaks of like trying out different sort of coloring techniques where you start off with the grayscale and then colorizing it, and I've been actually quite happy with some of the results so far. So I'm going to try that out, and then maybe even if it's hard or if I fail, we'll learn some stuff together, and I can go into it and definitely make a tutorial video about it once I get a hang of it. Once I have something I think that I can explain to people, that should work pretty good. So I made I also added this redness along the seam for sleeves. I wanted it to look like something's kind of growing. It's sort of growing into her and out of her, and it might be sort of like irritated, or there's something a bit more biological going on there. And then I added some of that redness around sort of the edges of the dress, and I just wanted that to look more biological and less like old leaves, but something maybe a bit more like it would have veins in it. There's fluid pumping through it, and it's maybe a bit like raw around the edges or just something. It's just trying to make it subtly grosser, just trying to push that Lovecraftian kind of look. Hey, Quincy. My cat just came to sit on my shoulder. So this staff is taken pretty much just one-to-one from the sketch that was given to me by Alexander. It can change feet, or it can change scale anywhere from 0 to 20 feet or so, which I don't ever remember seeing in any of the notes or anything. But after I showed him, after he got the finished work, Alexander did mention that it's very short in this piece, but in my defense, it is foreshortened quite a bit. So it is longer than it looks, just because it's angled away from the camera. So anyway, that's that. I did want it to have. It is. He did also later on describe it as being, or maybe it was in the illustrator, the sketches page. But I remember having it in my mind that it was. It was in the drawings. But it's sort of like a congealed energy, or some sort of like something along those lines. I don't have it with me available right now, but I just did something sort of like that. I started a lot more vibrant and over the top, but I felt it sort of clashed too much. It was the colors this way were too World of Warcrafty, and I wanted it to just be a bit more subdued and just to suit her a bit more. She's got a very kind of grim, austere, much more like mature audience kind of look, and having the big bright bubblegum kind of glowing like Marvel Comics style energy effects wouldn't work well at all, even though there's no reason why they would all look the same, or even match at all. I just thought that it would look a bit better, so I tweak it down a bit. But it was sort of like a magical kind of like a red hot, like, it's got just has a lot to it. It looked a bit too much like one of those old Splinter Cell games with the thermal vision, one of those sort of effects. And yeah, it's emanating some kind of like a mist, and it's just denser as it gets closer towards her hand, which is why it's darker there, and then it's more kind of blurred out and energetic near the ends. Just something sort of gaining structure, and for her to interact with it, where she's touching it, it's a bit more solid. That's that. I don't know what any of the symbols or anything mean on as far as the ends go. Also, I want to make a note of this. I'll include it in a tutorial video. But using the curves is a great way to tweak the colors and the look of your piece. Growing up, I would always so to use curves, it's Control M or Command M if you're on an Apple computer. It's a little bit tricky to explain without sitting there with just a one-to-one time scale. Or in real time, but growing up, once I found out about it, I used them on everything. But I would always take my image, make a new layer that just had everything, like sort of like select all, and then copy all and make a new layer, and then I'd go Control M and then play with the curves, and then that was just the layer with the modified colors. But I've started using the adjustment layers. And on the layers window at the very bottom, you can see there's that little circle that's half white and half black. And you just click on that and then hit curves. And then you can do things that way. Or like levels or color balance or hue and saturation or anything. And that is just such a magical feature. And the best thing about it is that it's non-destructive. It's non-permanent. So you can get the effect that you want. But you can always change it rather than being committed to the one layer that you can't adjust or anything. So that's a great way to deal with that stuff. So nowadays I never use layers, or I never use like levels or curves or brightness and contrast or anything, or hue and saturation just outright. Actually, I use saturation sometimes on a layer outright, but or even if I'm changing the color. But yeah, it's a great way to just keep things very fluid and not need to change anything too much. But yeah, I'm definitely going to make a video about that. It's one of the most useful things I've ever encountered with Photoshop. So yeah, her hairstyle, I like making sure that I include these like a lot of stray hairs. Women have much softer hairlines than men. Men tend to have very like distinct kind of hard line. There's hair or there's not hair. I've noticed that women have their hairlines, especially around their temples and foreheads, are much more faded and kind of less defined. And then when they have their hair back in like ponytails or anything, there's a lot of hair that always like sticks up around their neck and their sideburn area. And it's one of those things that you could easily never draw it and no one would ever notice. But I like those sort of subtle sort of details that you wouldn't normally include. And there's a few things. I've mentioned them before, but like the nasolabial fold, which are those sort of two lines that point towards your nostrils under your cheeks, or lips on men, or cat's whiskers. They're all things that you can get away with not drawing. And most people don't draw them. But you just you would never really notice it if it was there or not there. And I like including that stuff. It's fun. I like those little details. But yeah, her hair is just sort of a general done up Victorian, not fancy or ultra classy or like flamboyant or decorative or anything, but just up in the air. Or just not up in the air, but just worn up, just more practical. It's like something that she just might have just thrown up. And that's just how she would do her hair because of the culture she lives in. I mean, she's not trying to impress anybody with her hairdo. And then just lace on a new layer. It's all just one color. And then doing it where it's like as it curves away, and it's foreshortening away, you have more layers of the fine material in the way. And that just makes it darker. So I do that a lot with glass as well. That can help. Colored glass or clear glass or whatever, anything that has light pass through and it sort of falls around, or like jellyfish, that kind of thing. I thought lace would go well. I wasn't going to do it for a while, and then I realized that I should do it because it's in the description, and it's kind of like a neat. Alexander has had this neat sense of it, I think, where it's like these softer, more delicate sort of materials and things, and then mixed with just unadulterated power and evil and creepiness, and it's a good juxtaposition. It's not often I get to use that word. That word is that's like a 75-cent word. Yeah, I figured it was a good contrast or a good thing, so I just had to include it. And it's just sort of like phasing into the dress. It's like sort of just part of it. It's almost like this weird, gross monster thing it's almost kind of like the symbiote from Marvel Comics. It's like what Venom is, where it's like that thing that sort of makes clothes. Like it's actually just an alien. Anyway, yeah, I just thought of this. Her outfit is something that's more supernatural, maybe even partially sentient in some way, and it's making it it's not clothes. It just looks like clothes. It's like a weird physical manifestation of whatever is sort of with her, and it's just making itself useful while it's making her useful to it or something like that. That's just kind of, I wasn't super committed to it, but I figured that would sort of get there. I also wanted to make sure that the area around her eyes was more pink, something a bit more, I guess, sort of sickly or addicted looking, and worn out. Just helps add some of that kind of wear to the character. Same with like the hair coming down over her forehead. Just, her hair is up, but it's not. She's not like checking the mirror every 10 minutes. And then there's a course in the description, in the sketches, for having these like sigils floating around and like in her hand. Just this. So I didn't want to go with anything in particular. Some of the shapes in it were inspired by Alexander's sketch. But yeah, just something just creepy and arcane and sort of inspired by actual like alchemy symbols, and also certain sort of old like religious texts. I can't remember the name of the language, but there's something done with a quill pen or something. But The other thing that I liked about it was, or that I pictured her sort of making that symbol, like sort of painting it in the air with her finger, and so she has like a little bit of almost like a ghost ink kind of dripping from her fingernail, but it's dripping up because it's spooky. So that was just a subtle detail there. It's okay if no one ever sees it. And then because of the description did mention that she has like sigils or like symbols and things sort of in the outfit. I wanted them. I knew from the beginning I wanted them to be like glowing, like subtly. But I didn't want to like plaster her dress on them and keep them simple. So I had sort of, that's what all this stuff sort of up front is, where like I'd picture them being sort of across her chest and everything, and in sort of in more of like a focal use of like a direct, like compositional focal point around her face and chest and everything, and just it would look better. I felt it would look better focused in one sort of area than sort of just kind of more higgledy-piggledy. I think higgledy-piggledy would make her seem a bit more too like Miss Frizzly from the Magic School Bus, like, hey, I'm fun with all these symbols everywhere. I think having something focused seems a bit more officious and somber and menacing, less chaotic. And then these things are sort of these strange looking ghost daggers. I found out after it was done that they're actually supposed to be pointing the other way. But they didn't look too bad, in Alexander's opinion. So that's nice. Yeah, these are also sort of like that. It's like these pits. They're these spheres that are almost like little tiny black holes. So I just tried to keep them as close to the sketch that Alexander had as possible. I just didn't know like what they were. Like, should they be hazy? Are they floating in and out of existence? Do they have thickness? What's going on? So in this case, I kept them all directly visible head on, almost sort of like a video game sprite. Like if you ever played like Duke Nukem 3D back in like the early 90s, everything was made of sprites. So it's just this like 2D cardboard cutout that's always facing you. And I thought it'd be kind of just, I mean, it might not look as realistic or cool, but they're almost like something that is there, but you only really see it if you're a sentient being looking at it. Like it's more in your mind rather than visibly there, even though you can see it, but it's more directly tied into your mind or your soul or your spirit or whatever. It's kind of like a sprite in that regard. And it's true, you can tell, because I didn't just draw one and then copy and paste it. They're all from scratch. So I actually was thinking that. And yeah, I'm not sure if it had the inscriptions on it or the writing, but it had marks on it that I interpreted as writing, at least. I'm pretty sure that it was. So that's what this is for. They kind of remind me of like some sort of like amphibian egg, like a frog, like a cluster of like salamander eggs or something. Like just that sort of faded, like bubble tea. I fought the urge to add like a little specular to the balls as well. I wanted them to look more spherical, three-dimensional, but I thought adding the specular would ruin the idea of them being like a black hole, because a black hole can't reflect light because it eats light. So that was out. So anyway, that is Asmora Nomar for Alexander. I hope you guys liked it. She was a really big challenge, which is good. I like to be challenged. So this is for the free weekly character art lottery that I hold every Monday on Twitter at R&D Fantasy. On Sunday night, I announce the hashtag to tweet to enter, and then you just tweet it anytime before the following midnight at the end of Monday. And then I announce the winner on Tuesday, and I draw your D&D characters for free, just like this. And I make videos about it. Everybody's welcome to participate as long as your character is original fantasy, and that's all it takes. It can be humanoid, non-humanoid, creature, anything. Anyway, thanks for watching. Hope it helped.